This is
Make it plain.
Make it plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, it has been too long and not often enough, especially with the unusual frequency, ongoing frequency of these mass shootings. Many of you were commented on social media about it, and I appreciate it, about how glad you were to see me on MSNBC for the first time in quite some time last Friday. The unfortunate part about it is the reason I was brought on. And obviously a lot of coverage has been about Ukraine, and people don't have me on because they don't consider me a Ukraine expert. I might dispute that, but be that as it may, it's good to be back on the air, but it's to be brought back on the air to respond to yet more mass shootings as sort of a bittersweet. I'd rather not talk about that because I'd rather that not happen. And I'm sure everyone would agree. Our friend today joining us once again, always a great guest and ally of the show once again, is Igor Volsky of gunsdownamerica.org. Lord have mercy. What are we going to do? Igor, welcome back, man. How are you?
Mark, I am a Ukrainian who was born in Ukraine, and I also didn't get invited to talk about the crisis there. And like you, only appear during, honestly, moments of great tragedy. And right. It's staggered now. You know, when I started doing this work, Mark, in 2015, anytime there was a mass shooting, and you'll remember, your audience will remember, you had at least a half day of wall-to-wall coverage, and people would really be, I think, obviously quite shocked. And now, in order for you to see that on cable news, the massacre has to be large enough, right? So you either have to have usually, more than 10 people, or they have to be children or something, because they happen so frequently. And to the point where when I saw the news of the Texas shooting last week, the initial reports were 2 people killed. And so I thought, oh, no one's going to care about this, and so I don't have to move things around in my life. And we're just at such a painful moment where that's how things are categorized, at least for those of us who work on the issue, in terms of, how we have to reprioritize things in our lives. But, I'm here, though, because I am optimistic, and I think change is possible. And as I'm sure we'll get into, that will come from the leaders who are in power, who have agency to change the course of this issue, because it's not something that is natural and set in stone, and we just have to deal with it.
And what's important about Igor, folks, is what he's going to obviously share with us today, his thoughts about what can be done. And right now, the narrative is that Joe Biden and the Democrats can't do anything. And not just on this issue. Their argument would be they can't do anything about anything because of the filibuster, because of the Senate. And on the surface, that is, people are buying that. That makes sense. I know I've bought into it in many respects. Joe Manchin, the primary culprit, and Kirsten Sinema, the primary culprits when it comes to voting rights. But Igor is going to dispute that in terms of this gun violence piece, and that there really are no excuses. There are things Joe Biden and Schumer and the Democrats can do, aren't there, Igor?
Well, absolutely, Mark. And I have no idea why this president has spent so much time in the last couple of days getting up in front of reporters and telling Americans what he can't do, as opposed to laying out very tangible steps of what he can and should be doing. So, okay, what are those steps? Right now in the White House, there's not a single senior level official whose only job is to work on gun violence prevention. I think that's pathetic for a president who ran on a very comprehensive agenda to reduce gun violence. So number one, he can establish a first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. This office would coordinate a whole of government approach to dealing with this crisis. And you would have an actual staff and a leader to drive this issue every single day. That's incredibly important, Mark. And survivors of gun violence have been asking him to establish this office for years. He's refused. That's number one. Number two.
Let me just want to do a little deeper dive into that. Why do we think he's refused? That to me is just a no-brainer. It seems like the environment, everyone is crying out for that. I don't even see how his opponents could attack him. I mean, what's the worst thing they're only going to say what they've always said. They don't want gun violence to stop. I mean, that's obvious. Why is he loath to do this, do you think?
Because there appears to be a staff consensus that the issue, which is currently housed within the Domestic Policy Council, which as viewers and listeners know, is a kind of a policy shop within the White House that deals with a host of domestic policy issues. So there's a National Economic Council that deals with economic issues, Domestic Policy Council that has more issues. And I think there's some concern there, Mark, that taking the issue out of the Domestic Policy Council and putting it within some kind of different apparatus would render the Domestic Policy Council, would weaken that council. And so I think there's this bizarre power struggle about who owns this issue and who drives this issue. And the current staff who work on it are of the opinion, which I think is absolutely wrong, as I think as my list makes clear, is absolutely wrong, that they are doing everything within their power, that there's nothing more anybody else could do. And so they've really resisted.
And just to be clear, the Domestic Policy Council, I guess, feels some ownership because that was the place where the decision to grant the money to violence prevention community organizations took place. So I guess they feel like we did that. This should stay within our purview. They coordinated that effort along with DOJ and HHS. As you know, that money, those buckets of money came out of different agencies. And, and that you bring that up, that's so important. And that's to their credit, right? Sometimes I come across as overly critical. I am not suggesting that the Domestic Policy Council hasn't taken key initial steps to address this issue. They have. And the community funding that you reference, which is designed to go to organizations on the community level that have shown that by identifying the small number of individuals who are responsible for most of the gun violence in a given community, and working with those individuals and offering them different choices and changing the norms of behavior in that community, that you could bring homicides down using trusted messengers and other techniques and hospital-based efforts. That's all a very important work. And to underscore, I think is historic, frankly, for this administration to be pursuing it, and certainly working on it far more fervently, I would say, than even President Obama had, particularly during his first term. So they've done some good work, but as the crises of the last couple of weeks remind us, and as this everyday gun violence numbers, it continues to increase, it, I think, recalls the fact that it's simply not enough, and they need a larger structure and more staff and more expertise than they currently have. As I was saying to Igor, that's some pretty, to me, helpful political advice for a White House that is besieged by headlines saying it's adrift. That would be a particular focus that goes beyond the thoughts and prayers, the appearances at these memorials, which is fine. All that should happen, but that would it would be something, and just something that needs to happen. Okay, so I just wanted to park on that point, so because it still seems really unfathomable that they won't even consider that. Several steps here. new executive orders. So you would also argue there's some things that he can do with the stroke of his pen.
There certainly are. And, he said when he was, I believe, leaving Buffalo after that visit, that there's not more he could do. He has since walked that back, and there's some indication in the reporting that maybe they are considering new executive actions. To me, this is a no-brainer. He received during the transition, Mark, like a 200-page document that included not only all the executive actions that his administration should be taking, but also steps they could be pursuing both with and without congressional support. They've achieved a small fraction of that. In fact, just this past February, a group of gun violence prevention organizations sent very specific executive actions that he could do that he has not yet done. And the White House just simply hasn't engaged. The Domestic Policy Council simply hasn't engaged, either because it's not a priority or they're working on other issues, which again, to me, underscores the need for a full-time House for this issue. And Mark, this is everything from really shaping up some of the definitions we use when we talk about gun violence. As you know, mass shooting is defined in all kinds of ways. Ensuring that we have the data accurate, because from the data follows good policy, right? If you can truly define the problem, to things that are more substantial, right? There are steps he could take to strengthen the national background check system that are definitional and may sound small, but have an outsized impact, because as you know, on this issue, even a small tweak, even an incremental step can save lives. So why not do it? And so, I'm hopeful with this new reporting that they will really kind of get that in gear and start moving on it. Certainly, I think if I'm a voter and I am reminded yet again that I can get killed going to the grocery store, or my kids may not come back to school, right? That's what these shootings serve as. That's why they garner so much attention, because we can recall that, oh my God, we're really not safe. And of course, as we've been saying, there are so many Americans and communities across the country where that's an everyday anxiety, right? Because they have high rates of retaliatory gun violence and cyclical gun violence in their communities. And so for the president to get up there and to say, oh, there's nothing I could do, it's all really hard, it's the Republicans. To me, that's such a defeatist message. Why not lay out a series of executive orders? Yes, even if they're small, A, they will have an impact, and B, you're sending a message to the public that you're actually going to fight for what you promised them and for what you believed, or why they voted for you, right, to address this issue. And so on that piece, Mark, on the executive action piece, I think maybe we'll see some action, but it's slow moving because you don't have enough staff to drive it, which is why you need the office.
That's right. Well, that would make a difference. You also argue for him to use his experience as someone who bragged and has bragged about his experience as a senator and his ability to bring both sides together.
Yeah, look, he told us, particularly during the primary, that what distinguished him from all of the other opponents who were running against him in 2020 was the fact that he had these 30 years of experience of bringing Democrats and Republicans together to get hard things done. That's practically a quote that he would use on the campaign trail. And so given those tools and that skill set that he told us he had, I am confused why he's outsourced this current negotiation that, as you know, is going on between Senators Murphy and Cornyn on a very small piece that would encourage states to adopt these emergency risk protection order laws, which we can get into. Why he's outsourced that work to such an important matter that so many Americans care about. And I know this issue is important to him. So why isn't he rolling up his sleeves? Because look, I think that will do two things. One, I actually think that will get us closer to a deal, and I'll say why in a second. And number two, I think it sends a clear message, a clear political message to voters across the country that this president will fight. Right now, he looks like a bystander. And I don't know voters who want to vote for a bystander. I think voters want to vote for a fighter. And even if you can't get something across the finish line, you turn around and you tell voters, I fought for you. We almost got there, but I need you to turn out in November and vote on this issue to help me get the votes we need to start building safer communities in this country. That's just a much more compelling message to voters than blame Mitch McConnell, blame Marco Rubio, blame maybe even Joe Manchin, right? You got to show them. People are so distrustful of government. They don't believe what you tell them if you're a politician. You got to actually show them you're willing to engage in this stuff. And the fact that they don't see that is beyond me. You know, the other way to think about this, Mark, for me is we have on this issue, as you know, the viewers and listeners know, 90%, the entire country supports background checks and a whole slew of other policy solutions to reduce gun violence that we know work. If the administration believes that this president is incapable of channeling that 90% support into political pressure on Republicans to push them to make a deal, then what does that say about what their capabilities are, right? Almost everybody and their mother supports background checks. This administration argues, and they have to reporters, that if the president were to, and this is what I suggest, crisscross the country and transform that popular support into actual political pressure in key states in order to make Republicans feel, who, yes, I agree, are the obstacle to this, obviously, in the Senate, that they at least have to try to make a deal. Their argument is doing that, putting pressure on Republicans with their own voters, makes Republicans less likely to feel compelled to make a deal. That is insane. That is the kind of three, and you, Mark, you've been doing this for so long. You know, this is the kind of three-dimensional chess that Democrats play all the time because they have their heads up somewhere where nobody else has them, number one. And number two, are constantly afraid of their shadows on this issue and on a whole host of other issues. And it drives me up a wall. The fact that people buy this argument, that if the president got involved, he would politicize the issue and Republicans would feel less likely to make a deal, is such garbage to me. It's as if they believe that if the president keeps quiet, then we can trick Republicans into believing that making a deal won't be a political victory for him. Like, it's absurd. It's absurd to me, which is why, number three, travel the country, make the case.
and they listen to what Republicans are saying, that we don't want you out here doing anything, Joe, if you want us to do something. And Joe and the Democrats say, okay, whatever you say. That doesn't make any sense at all. And I think that they think that the public, because let's face it, they're all focused on the midterms. And I think they believe the public will just blame the Republicans for what happens. And if Democrats can win the midterms, then something can be done. Then the can just keeps getting kicked down one road and next road and next road. So you're right. It is very, very frustrating. Here's another no-brainer. Obama was good at these. Mm-hmm. Hosting a White House, well, he was good at holding summits, even not on this subject, but Obama was. Host a White House gun violence prevention summit. How hard can that be?
They have been promising advocates, senators, that they would do this for years, for literal years, right? So this would accomplish two things. One, it would begin a conversation about solutions to this issue at the presidential level. Number two, it would again signal to the country that this is a real presidential priority. Again, we do this with other issues. I think an issue that is so intertwined with our safety, with our lives, deserves no less priority and no less commitment. And again, the thing, Mark, like, this administration doesn't want to be caught doing anything on this issue. So think about this. They don't want voters to see them doing anything because they are so afraid that if that's what voters see, it will activate the other side, and the other side will come out in larger numbers in the midterms and vote for, Republican conservative candidates. If you believe that your message and your political muscle is so weak that you have to hide and duck from key issues not to activate the other side, you have a bigger problem. You are operating from a place of incredible weakness. And the underpinning of everything I'm saying is you have to build power on this issue, and you have to do it now. And I'm not suggesting, Mark, that if the president did all of these things that I'm laying out, that we will somehow magically overcome the systemic barriers before us to make a deal, right? The filibuster, the fact that we don't have 60 votes. I'm not suggesting those things will magically dissipate. What I'm arguing is that we can start building muscle memory for acting on this issue. We could get voters to understand and to get into a headspace that isn't, oh, this will keep on happening, government is ineffective, there's nothing they can do, which is where most voters are, just look at the polls, into a place of like, oh my God, when a mass shooting happens or when gun violence spikes, our leaders who we voted for will actually fight for us. And you build on that election cycle over election cycle. And that, Mark, in my opinion, is what's going to get us closer to 60 votes or closer to 50 votes who want to get rid of the filibuster, not this passive lead from behind bystander approach that, again, sorry to rant about this, but drives me up every wall I see.
Well, you're right. You do have a bigger problem. Mm-hmm. What that says, because the other thing we're hearing, that's the same argument, just to change subjects briefly, just show you the analogy. Mm-hmm. That's why they don't want to prosecute Trump. Mm-hmm. That's why they're saying to the New York DA, don't prosecute. They're saying if you prosecute Trump, even though you have all the evidence to indict, it will mobilize their base. So again, to make decisions when it comes to a very principled, moral, ethical, life and death issue, based upon a fear of mobilizing someone else's. Something is wrong with that. That something is terrible.
Well, it exposes a rot, right? It exposes an underpinning rot in how progressive candidates, Democratic candidates perceive their power and their ability. And again, I would rather fail trying than fail sitting on my hands. Because if I sit on my hands, I definitely fail. At least if I'm trying, there's a slightly higher chance. And the other thing, Mark, I've been making this point, is that, here in DC, and I'm sure like just throughout folks who work in politics and folks in America, and it's in our culture, I think, there's this like what I've started calling like sexy cynicism, that people feel that being cynical about the prospect for change kind of like makes them more sophisticated, makes them, they come across as better informed. The phrase of like, oh, well, that tracks, right? Like whatever happens, you're like, oh, of course that's gonna happen. And I am just of the opinion that for a country that went through a shocking 2016 election, that went through COVID, which shocked everybody, that went through a Trump administration where nobody could have predicted anything, maybe we should just humble up a little bit and get rid of this like cultural cynicism that we think that we know exactly how things are going to go, and recognize, I'm sure there's some like larger religious construct to this that I just don't know about. Maybe you can help with, and recognize that like the world is a random place and there are factors that are outside of our control and we can't always predict, particularly in politics or things. Look at what's happening in New York with all the damn districts where you have all these members running against each other. They could have never predicted that, right? So, and this is particularly true on this issue. Everybody says to me, Igor, Biden can do whatever he wants. He's not going to get 60 votes. He won't be able to break the filibuster. Stop attacking him. And I say, that may be true, but shouldn't we at least try Shouldn't we? Why are we pretending like we are God, that's seeing into these prophetic beings that see into the future? It's not like that in the real world.
Well, the spiritual aspect of it really is the inability and unwillingness to do anything about the deaths of all of these people,
Mm-hmm.
and the culture of numbness. And unfortunately, I think that's what enables probably even some of the politicians in action, because we're just going on with our lives as if, yeah, this happens. This is just what happens in America. And to me, that is the real spiritual rot that we can't protect. A great mentor of many of us, Dr. John Henry Clark, once said that, you judge a nation by how it cares when it's very young and it's very old. And that did not come more to light than elders being killed in Buffalo. And then just days later, children being killed in Texas. And if that does not awaken us or do something to us, I don't know what will. Lastly, and you kind of alluded to this just in terms of the list, the president and vice president, you argue, should travel to impacted communities and build support for action. Again, all these things you're recommending, even frankly, and I know you're not politically partisan in this, so to speak, but to me, these are still things that would help them in a politically partisan fashion, better than this. Let's just hold still. Let's not do anything to mobilize the other side. There has to be some type of moral leadership, and it's not religious. It's not even super moral to say, hey, let's stop having people get killed.
Mm-hmm.
That's not too much to ask, to argue for. I just don't see the controversy, Igor.
No, I don't see it too. And, yesterday, the New Zealand Prime Minister was at the White House, and I'm sure spoke to the president privately, and in her public remarks talked about how, yes, New Zealand culture towards gun ownership very different than American culture. Let's just put that on the table. I'm not suggesting there's a strong, parallel here. Just the cultures are different, the histories are different, etc. But what I am saying is New Zealand, Australia, Canada now are proving that you can change the cycle of these tragedies, right? That it doesn't have to constantly happen. And for us to as a nation, to be in this kind of national trauma. And I think breaking out of it starts with the leaders who promised us they would fight to actually fight. That's how we start, right? I mean, yes, we can go from the bottom up, right? Which is part of why we're talking, right? Because I'm trying to get people to see that directly pushing the president, creating a public demand for change from him will get him to move, right? We'll make it easier for him to make the argument of Americans across the country want me to do X, Y, Z. I have listened to their calls and I am moving forward, right? That's the kind of argument he needs to make, but he needs all of us to demand change in this regard. And I've just been so frustrated, Mark, and this is a separate conversation, but I've been so frustrated to see so many of my partners in the gun violence prevention movement, particularly some of our larger organizations, abdicate any effort to push the president, because when there's no political demand for elected officials to act, they will not. And it is our responsibility as advocates to make it to lubricate the process, to make it easier for them to fight and move in the right direction. So in many ways, I don't want to leave the impression that I'm just saying, it all starts and ends with Biden. It's really up to us to push him, to get him there, because we're still in a democracy last time I checked, or at least for the time being. So
right.
That's, I think,
if the people lead, the leaders will follow.
Yes.
That's really the way it's supposed to work. No, you're right, and that abdication, I like, and folks, be sure to follow Igor on Twitter as well, Igor Volsky. You talk about it as you described it as Igor leading from behind, and that is never an answer in a situation like this. And the notion that, well, we don't want to mobilize the other side. But apathy also begets apathy. Mm-hmm. To me, the greater tragedy and the greater malady is the numbness. And I'm talking to someone who, from the perspective of an African American, for decades now, there has been a numbness toward gun violence on our own part in our own community, just as accepted way of life. And I said, I wrote an article after the Aurora shooting where I said, I'm going to tell everybody something. You can, as much as you project the terminology, the racist terminology, black on black violence, pretty soon, the more this happens in the white community, you're going to have you're going to feel a sense of helplessness and numbness. We went to Buffalo last week. Just people said out, they said, we're numb. We don't know what to do. It just feels like people are resigned to this reality. And to me, that is to use your term, the greater rot, the greater evidence that of a culture and a society literally crumbling. Not folks waiting around trying to see what politicians are going to do or trying to strategize not to mobilize another politician's base. I think that's the thing that is most scary about all this. And I want everybody to hear very carefully what Igor says, that some of our organizations have even abdicated because people have bought into this. We have to do everything we can not to mobilize the other side, so that everything centers around not getting Republicans back in power, not getting Trump. So Trump back in power. But it's unfortunate that people have bought into the notion that preventing that means silence versus outspokenness.
Right. Fear of that outspokenness. Yeah.
Fear of outspoken, and, some sayings that it will outlive us all. There comes a time when silence is betrayal at some point along the way. Look, don't get me started. And maybe you need to do this. Maybe you need to do your own Igor Volsky sort of letter from the Birmingham jail. See, because back then, what was happening? The preachers were saying, Dr. King, be cool. You don't want to upset the apple cart too much. We agree with you, but it's a little too loud. And, we have to do this in the most moderate, soft-spoken way. I mean, he was saying, y'all crazy. No. So, I think that's really where we are on this piece. And maybe that's something that Igor Volsky needs to do. I feel that Igor Volsky is called to do. I'm calling Igor Volsky. I don't know how you want to interpret, but and I know you've been after me about co-authoring some stuff with you. So if you want to do that, we can do that too, because I think that needs to happen. We need to have our own, letter from the Birmingham jail, so to speak. Letter from the front line. Letter from the battlefield, from the carnage. That we are too effing polite. Gun violence is not polite. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, we have choice. Would you rather yourself or your loved one perish from COVID or from what's been happening with these guns? COVID is merciful now. Overnight, COVID became a merciful death compared to all of this. But anyway, there's so much. You mentioned something. I want to do this, and then I won't keep you much longer. You mentioned the processes going on in the Senate now, the negotiation, all of that. Does that have any? Is that going to make a difference? Do you think? Are they doing anything that is really going to bring about a difference?
Well, look, there's several ways to think about this. One is to say that Congress making tangible progress on this issue, even if it's small, is significant, right? And I would agree that even it appears that the current negotiations are focusing on encouraging states to adopt laws that would allow family members, employers, friends to petition a court and say to that court, my loved one is troubled for XYZ reason, right? Document it. And I believe they should not have access to a firearm. And if a judge approves that petition to the court, those firearms are then removed from that individual's home. And what we've seen in the states that have those kinds of laws is that they have prevented not only obviously mass tragedies, but also self-harm. And it's built on this theory of a domestic violence restraining order that we've had in this country for a very long time, right? If you can go into a court and you have to meet a certain evidence threshold to say, my partner has a history of this kind of abuse, I need you, judge, to keep them away from me, right? To issue an order saying that if they come within a certain distance of me, right, there will be consequences. Those have been that's when you hear a lot about red flag laws or emergency risk protection orders, as they're also called. It's the same thing, just two different names. That's what folks talk about, and there's some support from Republicans to adopt these kinds of measures. The deal that Senators Murphy and Cornyn appear to be hashing out would simply encourage states that don't have these kinds of measures to adopt them. Now, will that have a tremendous impact on our nation's gun violence crisis? No. Is it moving us in the right direction? Yes, right? So that is one way to think about it. The other is to say that maybe if we're starting in this super compromised place, right? We're not even talking about really background checks. We're talking about several steps down. Maybe that's the wrong approach to go into a negotiation and saying, can you agree? So Democrats are here and Republicans are here, and it's like this doesn't make sense. I'll stop. I don't know what I'm doing here, but you know what I mean, right? Democrats going in and kind of giving everything up immediately, and the opening gambit is, I'll meet you almost exactly where you are, right? Like, I don't know how much sense that makes strategically. So that's a challenge, right? I mean, I think a deal is a move in the right direction, but I also don't want it to create a dynamic where lawmakers are like, and we're done, right? Because you need so many more reforms to really make progress. And the latest reporting, at least that I saw last night, was that they had a fine Zoom call. So that should give you a sense of, how that's going.
Yeah. We'd be remiss, though, before we go. And folks, again, we invite you to go to gunsdownamerica.org. Keep up with everything that's going on there. Get involved. Ukraine, your thoughts about what's going on? I can imagine what they are, but we haven't talked to you. So
is this you bringing me on as a Ukrainian to finally speak about the first time in my career about the crisis? Mark, I have to tell you, I'll just say this. I left Kiev. We left Kiev when I was 5 years old, and we moved to Israel, lived there for 2 years, and then came to New Jersey when I was 7. And I've been in America for close to 30 years. And this happens in many immigrant families. It was true in ours, that the decision to leave the Soviet Union, which wasn't particularly easy, and was one that was really rooted in the challenges of living in a country that was so deeply entrenched in anti-Semitism, and reflected, the challenges that my family had in terms of educational advancement, employment advancement. I, at a very young age, I used to tell the story publicly when I was on my book tour a lot, confronted anti-Semitism when I was 4 or 5 years old, when I was in the hospital, kids making fun of my name. I had a different last name that was Jewish. We changed it to Volsky to make me seem less Jewish, so I could be, have more ability to live in Soviet society. So my mom made the choice for us to leave. And I never really thought a lot about what my life would be like had we not. And when the war started, Mark, on, I believe, February 24th, it really, truly hit me really hard, that contrast between what my life would have been had we stayed and what it is today, right? Just complete night and day. And what really stuck out to me, that if I was still living in Ukraine, in Kiev, I would be telling people to pick up their guns and fight the Russians, as opposed to now where I'm asking Americans to put their guns down. And that almost like shook me, in a very real, emotional, and personal way. And so, I think obviously of my former countrymen and women. And I honestly, Mark, thank all of the spirits and gods and good forces in this world, that my mother made the brave decision to leave the only country she's known, the only language she's spoken, to first move to Israel and then to America. It takes an incredible, as so many immigrants do and know every single day, it takes an incredible amount of courage to upend your life and start entirely anew. And frankly, I think part of what drives me to do the work I do is that kind of pedigree. And looking back at that history and thinking, my goodness, if my mom could do what she did, not once, but twice, switch countries, cultures, languages, then I believe I have the inner strength to deal with change and, overcome adversity and fight for what I believe in.
Yeah. And that's quite a existential juxtaposition, the way you put that, asking Americans, fighting for Americans to put their guns down while supporting the Ukrainians in picking up their guns and fighting the Russians. That's deep. That's deep. Folks, follow him on Twitter at Igor Volsky. Follow Guns Down America on Twitter and go to gunsdownamerica.org. Much more work to be done. Igor raising some very important questions, and unlike others, challenging the Democrats who, on paper at least, are in power and can do something. And as I've been saying thematically these past few months, if the party elected to power can't do anything, then we really don't have a functioning democracy anymore. We really do not have. And if we don't have a functioning democracy and any type of governability going on, then there's going to continue to be bedlam and violence and mass shootings. So somebody has to do something. Igor is trying, and we support him.
But we need all of you.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. As always, perform an act of kindness on behalf of an elder or young person. Write a letter to a sister or brother who just so happens to find her or himself incarcerated. Offer libations to the ancestors upon whose sturdy shoulders we all now stand. And above all, give thanks to the God of your understanding by whatever name you call her and him. All God asks of us is that we give each other love. Thanks for giving MIP love. And please remember to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.
We need all of you to push the president, the Senate Majority Leader to do their jobs. That's where it starts.
Indeed. Thanks, Igor.
Thank you, Mark.